The wedding day was a blur of excitement, a symphony of nerves and joy. I stood in front of the mirror in my crisp suit, adjusting the tie for the 100th time, trying to steady my shaking hands. I had always imagined my wedding day as a culmination of love, trust, and partnership, a celebration of finding the one person who would stand beside me through everything. And today, that dream seemed to be coming true. Samantha had been my everything for the past 3 years. She was beautiful, ambitious, and the kind of person who lit up every room she walked into. Friends would tease me, saying I had outkicked my coverage, and I'd laugh, nodding in agreement. She was out of my league, but she chose me, and that made me the luckiest man alive. The morning of the wedding was perfect. My best man, Derek, had made sure everything was in order. The ceremony would be held in the garden of a historic estate, surrounded by blooming flowers and the soft hum of a string quartet. I could hear the faint laughter of Samantha's bridesmaids from across the venue, a joyful reminder that in just a few hours, we'd be husband and wife. But there was something strange in the air, a whisper of unease I couldn't quite place. It wasn't cold feet. I loved Samantha, and the thought of spending my life with her filled me with a quiet confidence. It was something else, something buried deep, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Derek noticed my silence as we stood outside waiting for the ceremony to begin. "You okay, man? You've got that look like you're about to walk into an exam you forgot to study for." I chuckled, shaking off the feeling. "Yeah, just nerves, I guess. It's a big day." He clapped me on the shoulder. "You've got this. Samantha's amazing. You two are perfect for each other." I nodded, forcing a smile. Perfect. That's what everyone said. We were perfect together. So why did I feel like something was about to crack wide open? I didn't know then that the cracks were already there, hidden beneath the surface of Samantha's radiant smile and the promises she'd whispered late at night. Promises of love, loyalty, and forever. Promises I believed with all my heart. As I stood waiting for the ceremony to start, I had no idea my world was about to implode. The double life she had so carefully hidden for 2 years was about to unravel, and with it, everything I thought I knew about the woman I was about to marry. The ceremony was set to begin in 20 minutes, and guests were starting to take their seats under the delicate white canopy. The weather couldn't have been better, blue skies with soft clouds that seemed painted just for the occasion. Everything was picture perfect, yet my stomach twisted as if I'd swallowed lead. Derek left to check on something with the event planner, leaving me alone for the first time that day. I leaned against an ivy-covered pillar, scanning the garden, trying to absorb the moment. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Why couldn't I shake this feeling? It wasn't as if Samantha had ever given me a reason to doubt her. Or at least, not one I could put my finger on. She was attentive, loving, and always seemed genuinely invested in our relationship. But now, standing here in the silence, little moments from the past started to creep into my mind like shadows in the bright sunlight. There were times she'd disappeared for hours with vague excuses. Meeting with a client, she'd say. Samantha worked in real estate, and her schedule was often erratic, so I never questioned it. Or when she'd turn her phone screen away from me when a text came through, brushing it off as just work stuff. I told myself I was being ridiculous. After all, every couple has moments like that. It's part of trusting someone. But there was one instant I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. 6 months ago, Samantha had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping. Honestly, I wasn't, but an email notification caught my eye. It was from someone named Ryan, and the subject line simply read, "Can't stop thinking about last night." I froze. My stomach churned, and my heart pounded so loudly I thought I might faint. But before I could process it, Samantha walked in, saw me standing there, and immediately closed the laptop with a breezy laugh. "Work stuff," she said, pressing a kiss to my cheek. "You know how demanding clients can be." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But that email lingered in my mind like a splinter. I told myself I was overthinking it. I told myself I trusted her. And I never brought it up again. Now, standing on the brink of what was supposed to be the most important moment of our lives, that memory resurfaced like a ghost, haunting me. Who was Ryan? Was it really just work? I shook my head, forcing myself to focus. I couldn't let a shadow of doubt ruin today. Samantha loved me. She said yes when I proposed. She wanted this life with me, didn't she? The music began to play softly, signaling it was time for me to take my place at the altar. I straightened my tie, plastered on a confident smile, and walked toward the garden. Whatever doubts I had, they would have to wait. Today was not the day to question anything. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But deep down, I had no idea the truth was about to come crashing down around me. Standing at the altar, I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on me, yet my thoughts were miles away. The garden was alive with whispers of admiration for the setup. White roses lining the aisle, delicate music floating on the breeze, but none of it reached me. My mind churned, replaying every stray moment of doubt I'd ignored, every excuse I'd made for Samantha's odd behavior. The soft change in music signaled her imminent arrival, drawing a collective murmur of excitement from the guests. I straightened my posture, readying myself for the moment she would appear. But before she did, Derek's presence beside me drew my attention. His face was tight, his movements brisk as he gestured for me to step aside. Something was wrong. Without a word, I followed him away from the altar, down a quiet path behind the rows of chairs. The murmurs of the crowd grew faint as we neared the edge of the garden, where the staff bustled with last-minute preparations. Derek handed me his phone, his expression heavy with something I couldn't yet name. The screen lit up with damning evidence. Photos of Samantha with a man I didn't recognize, their intimacy undeniable. They weren't just close. They were entwined, their expressions filled with a kind of joy I thought was ours alone. The timestamps told the story. These moments weren't from some distant past. They were recent, painfully recent. The messages that followed painted an even darker picture. Words meant for lovers, not acquaintances. Plans and promises, the kind that made my chest tighten and my breath catch. Every exchange confirmed what my gut had tried to tell me for months. Samantha had been leading a double life. The pieces clicked into place with brutal efficiency. Her late nights, her secretive glances at her phone, her vague explanations, they all pointed back to this man, Ryan. The name I'd brushed aside months ago when a suspicious email popped up on her laptop. The name I convinced myself was unimportant. It was all too clear now. A cold numbness settled over me as I returned the phone to Derek without a word. My mind was a storm of questions, none of which had simple answers. How could she stand there, preparing to marry me, while carrying on this affair for 2 years? How had I not seen it? Or worse, had I chosen not to see it? The sounds of the wedding, soft music, distant laughter, faded into the background as I turned and walked toward the bridal suite. My steps felt heavy, deliberate, as if each one carried the weight of the betrayal I now carried with me. I didn't need anyone else to confront her. I would face Samantha alone. This was no longer about vows or ceremonies or perfect garden backdrops. This was about truth, no matter how shattering it would be. The path to the bridal suite felt endless, each step accompanied by a rising tide of anger, hurt, and disbelief. The world around me blurred. The soft music from the ceremony, the laughter of guests, the vibrant blooms lining the garden. All of it seemed distant, irrelevant. My focus was singular now. I needed to see her, to demand the answers she had so carefully hidden from me. The door to the suite loomed ahead, slightly ajar. A sliver of movement caught my eye through the gap, her figure pacing inside. She was still in her wedding dress, an image that should have been breathtaking, but now felt like a cruel joke. How could she wear white, symbolizing purity, loyalty, and truth, while carrying such a monumental lie? I paused for a moment outside the door, steadying myself. My hand hovered over the handle, my breath shallow and uneven. A part of me wanted to turn back, to let the charade play out for the sake of the guests, for the sake of appearances. But I knew I couldn't. The weight of what I'd seen demanded action, demanded closure. I pushed the door open, the creak breaking the silence of the room. Samantha turned sharply, her face a mix of surprise and something else. Was it fear? Guilt? She quickly masked it with a smile, but I could see through her now. The woman who had seemed so perfect, so loving, was a stranger standing before me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, electric with unspoken accusations. Her hands fidgeted with the lace of her dress, a nervous habit I'd seen countless times before, but now it only fueled my anger. She wasn't nervous because of the wedding. She was nervous because she knew her secrets were unraveling. I stepped closer, my voice low and measured despite the storm inside me. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply said her name, Samantha, and waited. Her smile faltered, her eyes darting to the door as if searching for an escape. There was none. The room felt like a stage, the walls pressing in as the silence stretched. I could see her grappling with what to say, how to explain, how to spin this web one last time. But no explanation could undo what I'd seen. No words could repair the cracks she'd deliberately created. And so I stood there, waiting for her to speak, knowing that whatever came next would shape everything that followed. Samantha stood in the center of the room, her wedding dress shimmering in the soft light, a cruel contrast to the betrayal I now knew. She froze when I entered, her hands clutching the lace of her gown as if it could shield her from the confrontation she had to know was coming. Her face, once the picture of calm and poise, was now pale, her eyes darting nervously to meet mine before skittering away. I shut the door softly behind me, the click reverberating like a hammer blow. The room seemed smaller now, the air thick with unspoken truths. Samantha's gaze dropped to the floor, her shoulders sagging under a weight I could no longer carry for her. She didn't say anything, and I didn't prompt her. I simply stood there, letting the silence press down on us both. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling in quick bursts, as though she'd been caught in a lie before she could weave it into something more palatable. The space between us felt cavernous despite the intimacy of the room. Her vulnerability, so stark and unguarded, was a mask I no longer trusted. I moved toward the window, unable to look at her. Outside, the garden gleamed in the sunlight, the scene idyllic and perfect, a cruel mockery of the reality unfolding within these walls. Guests waited just beyond the glass, unaware of the unraveling disaster. It struck me how easily appearances could deceive, how fragile the veneer of happiness truly was. Behind me, Samantha's quiet sobs began, her breath hitching as tears fell. I didn't turn to her. The sound, once something that would have filled me with concern, now felt hollow. Her tears no longer held the power they once did. They were the aftermath of her choices, not the balm for mine. I stood still, watching the movement of people outside, my thoughts heavier than the silence. I wondered how long she had thought she could keep this going, how deeply she believed I would remain blind to the cracks in her facade. The realization that she had taken that gamble and lost cut deeper than I could have imagined. I turned from the window, the weight of her betrayal settling fully on my chest. She hadn't moved, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling as they clutched at her dress. The silence stretched, her body language pleading for me to say something, to break the unbearable tension. But no words came. There was nothing I could say that could undo what she had done, nothing that could bring back the life I thought we were building. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the room. The noise of the wedding preparations buzzed faintly in the background as I stepped into the corridor, but I barely heard it. The weight of what I had just left behind was suffocating, and yet I knew there was no going back. Samantha had destroyed more than just my trust. She had shattered the foundation of everything I thought I knew about her and about us. Walking away from the bridal suite, I felt like my insides had been gutted. Every step was fueled by a simmering rage that threatened to boil over, but the numbness beneath it was worse. My entire world had been built on a foundation of lies, and now that foundation had caved in, leaving me floundering in the wreckage. The staff bustled around, smiling and chatting, blissfully unaware of the train wreck unfolding behind the scenes. They carried trays of champagne and adjusted the floral arrangements, oblivious to the reality that the bride had been betraying her fiancé with someone else for 2 years. It was laughable, really. Here they were perfecting every petal on the roses while my life was going up in flames. As I rounded the corner, the rows of guests came into view. They were smiling, laughing, raising glasses in what was supposed to be a celebration of love. My stomach churned as my eyes found my parents in the front row. My mom was fussing with her hat, her face glowing with pride, while my dad sat stoic, nodding politely at a relative he probably didn't even like. They had no idea. Not one of them. If they discovered the lies and betrayal hiding in plain sight, those smiles would vanish instantly. And Samantha? She was probably still in the suite, fixing her makeup, wiping away her crocodile tears, maybe even rehearsing some half-assed excuse. She was good at that, always quick on her feet, always ready with a lie that sounded just sweet enough to swallow. For 2 years, she had been juggling me and her side piece, living a double life while I played the fool. The rage bubbled up, hot and acidic. I thought about every time I'd held her, every time I'd trusted her when she'd fed me some vague excuse. Late showing at a client's house. Girls' night ran late. All the time she'd look me in the eye, kiss me goodnight, and then turn around to F someone else. That asshole Ryan had been in her life, in her bed, while I was planning a future for us. I clenched my fists, the thought of them together searing into my mind. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the goddamn audacity. She had let me pour everything into us, my time, my energy, my love, while she snuck off to screw some guy behind my back. And now, here I was, about to stand in front of 100 people and make vows to her? It was like a sick joke. The urge to explode, to throw the whole thing into chaos right there was almost overwhelming. Part of me wanted to march back into the suite, tear the truth out of her, and let her deal with the fallout. Let the guests, the staff, hell, even the damn caterer, see her for what she really was, a liar and a cheat. But another part of me, the part still clinging to some shred of self-respect, held me back. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of watching me lose it. She wasn't worth that. I stared out at the garden, at the perfect rows of chairs, the pristine aisle lined with petals. The whole thing was a farce, a pretty stage for a love story that didn't exist. There was no saving this, no salvaging the disaster she had created. The only thing I could do now was walk away. So I turned my back on the guests, the garden, the wedding that wasn't going to happen. My steps felt heavy, but they were resolute. Samantha might have destroyed what we had, but I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. She could keep her lies, her games, and her double life. She'd already thrown away the truth, and me with it. I walked away from the garden, my body moving on autopilot, my mind replaying every filthy detail I'd just learned. Samantha, the woman I was supposed to marry, the one I'd spent years building a life with, had been sneaking around like some cheap soap opera villain. And not for a few weeks, not even a few months, 2 goddamn years. She'd been cheating with Ryan, this slimy, self-satisfied bastard, while I was working to make her dreams come true. The images Derek had shown me wouldn't leave my mind. Samantha, tangled up with this asshole in a dimly lit bar, their bodies pressed together like they couldn't get enough. There were pictures of her sitting on his lap, her lips on his neck, her hands clutching at his chest like she was starring in some amateur porn flick. The timestamps were recent, last week for Christ's sake. And the texts? Those were even worse. She called him baby. She'd sent him pictures. Not just regular ones, either pictures meant for private moments, moments I thought were only between her and me. I'd read messages where she told him she couldn't wait to see him again, that she missed him, that she loved him. Loved him. She was stringing me along while telling this prick she wanted to run away with him. And then there were the plans. Oh, those were the cherry on top. They talked about vacations they'd taken, weekends she'd told me were for work conferences or girl time. They had their own goddamn inside jokes, their own routines. I wasn't just being cheated on. I was a sideshow in their twisted little circus. I felt my stomach churn, while rising as the full scope of her betrayal hit me again. She hadn't just lied to me, she'd lied to everyone. My parents, her parents, our friends. She'd stood beside me at engagement parties, smiling like the perfect fiancé, while texting this guy under the table. Every time I'd kissed her, touched her, she'd been giving herself to someone else behind my back. The worst part? She didn't even have the decency to come clean. She was ready to walk down the aisle, ready to let me make vows to her in front of everyone we cared about, while her side piece probably sat somewhere in the crowd, smirking. It made me sick. I stopped walking and leaned against a tree, trying to steady myself. The anger boiled over, hot and unrelenting. She wasn't just unfaithful, she was cruel. She played me for a fool, stripped away my dignity, and stomped all over it like it meant nothing. And for what? Some loser who probably couldn't even look me in the eye. I wanted to scream, to tear apart the perfect little setup they'd created for this wedding. I wanted to drag her out in front of everyone and make her confess what she'd done, make her own the mess she'd made. But I couldn't. As much as I hated her in that moment, I hated the thought of everyone seeing me like this even more. Humiliated. Used. Wrecked. No, she didn't get that satisfaction. She could keep her lies, her secrets, and her perfect little mask. I wasn't going to play along anymore. She could deal with the fallout herself. I was done cleaning up her messes. With one last glance at the bustling garden, I turned away. The guests could wait. The ceremony could fall apart. Samantha could rot in her lies. I was walking out, and she could figure out what came next without me. The farther I walked from the garden, the more the reality of Samantha's betrayal clawed at me. Each step felt heavier, the rage burning in my chest like a furnace. The image of her, dolled up in that pristine white dress, made me want to laugh. And not the kind of laugh that came from amusement, but the bitter, guttural kind that erupted when you realized you'd been played for a fool. 2 years. 2 years she had been sneaking around with Ryan, a man I didn't know but now despised with every fiber of my being. I imagined him smirking, maybe sitting in the crowd right now, waiting to see if she'd really go through with it. Maybe they even planned to meet up later, laughing about how easily I'd swallowed her lies. The thought made my blood boil. I couldn't let this go unspoken, not anymore. She wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed, wasn't going to have the satisfaction of thinking she'd pulled one over on me. If she wanted to live a double life, I'd make damn sure she paid for it, starting now. I stopped abruptly, spinning on my heel and heading back toward the bridal suite. The quiet resolve I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by something raw and unfiltered. She had shattered my life, my trust, my future, and I wasn't about to let her slink away from that without consequences. The staff near the suite gave me curious glances as I passed, probably wondering why the groom looked like he was ready to tear the place apart. I ignored them, my focus locked on that door. This wasn't going to be a calm conversation. This wasn't going to be a private, quiet moment of reckoning. If she wanted to pretend everything was fine, I was going to rip that facade off in one pull. I reached the door and pushed it open without knocking. Samantha was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting her veil, her face still streaked with the remnants of tears. She turned sharply at the sound of the door slamming against the wall. Her mouth opened, maybe to offer some excuse, maybe to start another lie, but I didn't give her the chance. "Who the hell do you think you are?" I demanded, my voice low but laced with fury. She froze, her hands dropping to her sides. For the first time, there was no pretense, no attempt to smile or smooth things over. She knew. She knew I had seen through it all. The silence that followed was suffocating. Her lips trembled as if she were about to speak, but I didn't need to hear it. No excuse could make this better. No explanation could undo the damage. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, the weight of her deceit pressing down on me like a vice. "You were going to marry me," I said, my voice sharp and cutting. "You were going to stand in front of all those people and swear to love me forever. While you've been FING someone else for 2 goddamn years. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Or were you just hoping I'd be too stupid to notice?" She flinched, her shoulders shaking as fresh tears streamed down her face. But those tears, those pathetic sobs, only fueled my anger. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone caught in the act. "You disgust me," I said, the words spilling out like venom. "Every single moment we've had, every time I told you I loved you, every time you smiled at me and pretended to care, it was all a lie. And you were fine with it. You were fine letting me build a future with you while you lived this twisted double life." She crumbled onto the small bench beside the vanity, her hands covering her face. Her sobs were muffled, but I didn't care. I didn't have the energy to comfort her, and I sure as hell didn't have the energy to pretend she deserved forgiveness. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle between us. She didn't speak, and neither did I. There was nothing left to say. The person I had loved, the person I thought I was marrying, was gone. Or maybe she had never existed at all. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of her sobbing fading behind me. The staff outside averted their eyes as I passed, but I didn't care. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. Samantha's perfect little world was collapsing, and for once, she would have to face the mess she'd made. Alone. The suite door slammed behind me as I stormed back toward the garden, the sound of Samantha's sobs still echoing faintly in my ears. My mind was racing, thoughts colliding in a whirlwind of anger and betrayal. I wasn't sure what I would do when I reached the altar, but one thing was clear. This wasn't going to end quietly. The sunlight hit me like a slap as I stepped out of the shadows and into the open. The guests were seated, their faces bright with anticipation. The aisle was a pristine ribbon of white, bordered by flower arrangements that now seemed absurdly out of place. It was a scene from a dream, but I was living a nightmare. I stopped at the back of the aisle, my heart pounding in my chest. My parents, seated in the front row, glanced back at me with smiles that quickly faded when they saw my expression. My mother's brow furrowed, her hand instinctively moving to my father's arm. She could tell something was wrong, but she didn't know just how wrong. The officiant stood at the altar, his serene expression a sharp contrast to the chaos in my mind. The music swelled, signaling Samantha's impending entrance. The guests turned in their seats, expecting to see the radiant bride walking toward her future. Instead, they saw me, standing alone, fists clenched, jaw tight, and heartbroken. I looked at the aisle, the rows of friends and family, the altar where I was supposed to promise my life to her. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life crumble. My thoughts turned to Samantha, still in the bridal suite, probably trying to piece herself together. I had no doubt she'd try to spin the situation, to save face, to paint herself as the victim. But not this time. Not today. I stepped forward, the crunch of gravel under my shoes drawing the attention of every guest. Conversations hushed, heads turned, and the weight of their stares settled on me. I didn't flinch. Let them look. Let them wonder. They deserved to know the truth just as much as I deserved to speak it. Reaching the altar, I turned to face the crowd. My throat felt dry, but I forced the words out. Before we begin, I need to say something. My voice was steady, louder than I expected, and it carried over the garden, silencing even the faintest whispers. Eyes widened, confusion etched into every face. My mother clutched my father's arm tightly, her concern palpable even from a distance. My best man, Derek, who had tried so hard to shield me from this moment, stood frozen, his face a mix of guilt and sorrow. I know you all came here to celebrate. I continued, my voice growing firmer. To witness the start of what was supposed to be a lifetime commitment. But there's something you need to know. I swallowed hard, my gaze sweeping over the crowd. Samantha isn't the woman you think she is. And this wedding? It's not happening. Gasps rippled through the guests like a wave. Murmurs began to build, whispers of confusion and shock. I ignored them. My focus was on reclaiming my dignity, on exposing the truth that had been buried under layers of lies. For 2 years, I said, my voice thick with emotion, Samantha has been lying to me, to all of us. She's been having an affair, living a double life, while planning this wedding. I found out today, and there's no way I can stand here and pretend everything is fine. The murmurs turned into full-blown shock. Guests exchanged looks, some covering their mouths, others shaking their heads. My mother's face was ashen, her hand now pressed to her chest as if she were trying to steady her breathing. Derek stepped forward slightly, as if to intervene, but I raised a hand to stop him. I'm not telling you this to embarrass her, I said, though a part of me knew that wasn't entirely true. I'm telling you this because I can't let her deceit go unspoken. I deserve better than this. And so do all of you. I stepped down from the altar, the silence deafening now. The garden, once a place of celebration, felt like a battleground, the wreckage of Samantha's lies scattered across every face in the crowd. I didn't wait to see the fallout. I didn't look back. As I walked away, leaving the garden, the aisle, and the life I thought I was building behind, I felt a strange sense of relief. This wasn't the ending I wanted, but it was the one I needed. Samantha's lies had shattered one future, but I knew I'd find a way to rebuild. And this time, it would be on my terms. As I sat on the cold stone wall, the quiet around me was broken by the occasional faint sound of shouting from the garden. Samantha's perfect world had crumbled, and I knew she was scrambling to pick up the pieces. But it was too late. She'd built her life on lies, and I had torn the curtain down for everyone to see. The damage was done. I stayed there, letting the weight of the moment settle in my chest. The adrenaline that had carried me through my confrontation with the guests and my escape from the ceremony was gone now, replaced by a hollow, steady sense of finality. This was the end, not just of the wedding, but of everything. Samantha and I were finished. She had destroyed any chance of reconciliation, and I had made sure she'd feel the consequences of her actions long after I walked away. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. Derek came back to me a while later, his face pale and his expression grim. "It's chaos in there," he said, leaning against the wall beside me. "Her parents are yelling, her friends are crying. People are leaving in droves. I've never seen anything like it." Good, I thought. She deserved every ounce of it. I asked him to retrieve my things from the suite. My phone, my wallet, the jacket I'd left hanging on the back of a chair. I didn't want to step foot in that place again. He came back quickly, handing over my belongings without a word. His silence was comforting. There was no judgment, no pity, just understanding. As I gathered my things, a staff member appeared, cautiously approaching. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "the bride wanted to speak with you. She's waiting in the suite." I shook my head. "Tell her I have nothing to say. She knows why." The staff member nodded, retreating quickly, and I watched him disappear back toward the chaos. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of trying to explain herself. There was nothing she could say that I wanted to hear. No apology, no excuse, no sob story would erase the fact that she had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. I left the estate without looking back, Derek walking beside me until we reached the parking lot. "What are you going to do now?" he asked, his voice quiet. I shrugged, my resolve hardening. Move on. Forget her. Let her deal with the mess she made. And that's exactly what I did. I blocked her number, deleted her photos, and erased every trace of her from my life. I didn't care how she tried to spin the story to others. I knew the truth, and so did everyone who mattered. The wedding had turned into a spectacle of her lies, and there was no recovering from that. In the weeks that followed, I heard snippets of what happened to her. Friends told me she'd gone into hiding, embarrassed and humiliated. Her family was furious, and many of our mutual friends cut ties with her completely. Ryan, the man she'd been seeing, apparently bailed the moment things fell apart, leaving her truly alone. Good riddance. I never saw her again. Not at the grocery store, not at a bar, not even in a fleeting moment on the street. It was as if she had disappeared from the world. And for me, that was perfect. Her absence was exactly what I needed to rebuild my life. Some scars would remain, but I wouldn't let them define me. Her lies and betrayal were her burden to carry now, not mine. I'd walked away from the wreckage she created, and I never looked back.